Okay, so good morning again, everyone. Welcome to the Cradle-to-Career Data System Data and Tools Advisory Board. I am your host. My name is Sydney Armendariz. I am the Chief of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships here at C2C. That's just a really long-winded way of saying that I am here to help you as board members navigate your role and do some really awesome work for this system. So next slide, please. So for today's meeting, we have a pretty informative agenda today. So first, we will start off with a Bagley-Keene presentation from the Department of Justice. They will talk about the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which is really important for our work here at C2C with our boards. So really awesome information that's coming to you today. And then next up, I will talk about advisory board governance and advisory boards and how feasibility studies may work for your work. And then we'll have Shannon Serrato, our Director of Engagement, talk about the community guidelines and toolkits. Then we'll have Ryan Estriado, our Director of Data Programs, go over our data definitions, the teacher training and retention data, and employment data. So the last half is all about data. So we have a really good agenda for you here today. We do have the chat function available. If you do use the chat, please make sure that you're chatting to everyone. If you have any technical issues with Zoom, please, you can direct message myself, Regil Baltazar from West Ed. She's also on board as our Zoom DJ and can help with any Zoom logistical issues that you may have. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Milad Dalju from the Department of Justice to go through our Bagley-Keene presentation. So I'll turn it over to you, and if we could get the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. That's my fault. Sorry. Actually, we're going to switch and we're going to turn over to Marianne Bates, our Executive Director. That was my fault. My apologies, Milad.
No problem. Oops.
Thank you, Sydney. I just wanted to welcome everyone this morning. It's really great to see you again. Our first meeting last month was really about orientation, and you were all sworn in. And today we're starting to dive into some of the substance of what we're doing. And I just wanted to say, this is your meeting, right? It's your advisory board. And we're here as a staff to support you and to, help you with your work, but really would love for you to take ownership of this, talk, help us understand what you would most likely like to discuss. So we're really looking forward to getting your feedback on the things that are on the agenda for today, and also just, learning from you on how you'd like to do this shared work together. So we're really thrilled that you're here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marianne. Pro tip, never skip your boss in a presentation. So thank you so much for that. So now next slide, now I'll turn it over to Milad Dalju from Department of Justice to talk about Bagley-Keene. So thank you so much. Oh, Milad, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Sydney. No matter how many times I do this, I always forget to unmute myself. Good morning. I'm Deputy Attorney General Milad Dalju, and I'm here to give a very brief overview of your obligation as committee members under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Let me start by saying that the open meeting restrictions of Bagley-Keene are very frustrating for most people that are required to adhere to them. That's because Bagley-Keene requirements deprive individuals of their natural communication patterns. In between public meetings, you may feel the urge to pick up the phone and call one or two or more of your fellow committee members to pick their brains, or you may want to have lunch with a few of them, and committee business may naturally come up, but such activity is unfortunately limited by Bagley-Keene. Learning how to comply with Bagley-Keene as a member of a public body is not intuitive and takes some adjustment. I can't see the slideshow. I'm sorry. There we go. Perfect. Can we go ahead and go to the next one? Okay, thank you. So if you understand the philosophy behind Bagley-Keene, it may be a bit easier to comply with it. So It's important to remember that the purpose of Bagley-Keene is not to promote government efficiency. If the state wanted to maximize efficiency, it would not have created this advisory committee. It would instead have delegated all decision-making to a single department head. When the state creates a multi-member body such as this one, it makes two important value judgments. First, that consensus building through dialogue and collaboration by a group of people with different backgrounds, viewpoints, and experiences is more important than efficiency. And second, that the public should be part of that consensus building. Keeping in mind these two overarching policies, the need for consensus building as you make decisions, and the need to make sure that the public is invited to have a seat at the table while you're making decisions, will make it easier to understand and embrace the requirements of Bagley-Keene. Some of you may have familiarity with the Brown Act, which is very similar to Bagley-Keene. The Brown Act governs meetings at local levels, and the Bagley-Keene governs meetings at the state level. Though the two laws are very similar, there are a few distinctions. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, there are 5 types of state bodies that are subject to Bagley-Keene, but I'll only mention 2 of them for the purpose of this meeting. First, Bagley-Keene applies to all multi-member bodies created by statute. Because this committee was created by the Education Code, it must comply with Bagley-Keene. This is true even if a state body is advisory only and does not have decision-making authority. Next slide, please. Bagley-Keene also applies to advisory bodies created by state bodies, such as yourself. Advisory bodies are those that have at least 3 members and do not exercise decision-making authority. Defined broadly, formal action is any action resulting in an advisory body. So there's really 3 requirements to create an advisory body under Bagley-Keene. One, that you take a formal action to create what a lot of people call a subcommittee. There has to be at least 3 members of that subcommittee, and the subcommittee does not have the authority to exercise decision making. What that really means is that if you create an advisory body or a subcommittee that has less than 3 members, then it does not have to comply with Bagley-Keene. But if you have less than 3 members, so let's say you create a subcommittee of 2 members, but it has decision-making authority, then it does have to comply with Bagley-Keene. That's a little bit complicated, and I would advise that you reach out to your staff if something comes up that you think may create an advisory body. Next slide, please. Bagley-Keene applies immediately upon appointment, even before members take the oath of office and attend a meeting. Next slide. A basic concept of Bagley-Keene is that the meeting must be open to the public. What is a meeting? A meeting is a gathering of a majority of the committee to deliberate on any matter under the jurisdiction of the committee. So the 2 key concepts here are that there's a majority of the members deliberating on something that's within the jurisdiction of the committee. And so if committee members are discussing something that's outside of the jurisdiction of this committee, then it's not going to qualify as a meeting under Bagley-Keene. And if there's less than a majority, even if they're deliberating something, it does not fall within Bagley-Keene. Deliberation includes all phases of decision-making, from information gathering to making a final recommendation. Information gathering includes training on how to conduct meetings. Thus, this training that you're receiving today in itself is subject to Bagley-Keene, though you're only receiving information and will not be making any decisions. Bagley-Keene gives the public the right to present not only when a committee takes action, but also to monitor and participate in the consensus building leading up to the action. Next slide, please. Awesome. So Bagley-Keene prohibits serial meetings. A serial meeting is a series of communications, each involving less than a majority of the committee, but collectively involving a majority to deliberate on any matter under the committee's jurisdiction. A serial meeting can occur through a chain of communications from one member to another, or when one person acts as a hub of a wheel and communicates individually to various spokes. A serial meeting can occur directly or indirectly through intermediaries. For those of you who represent an organization, communication between your organizations regarding committee business may constitute indirect serial meetings, which are prohibited by Bagley-Keene. A serial meeting also includes a series of communications collectively involving a majority of the members of a subcommittee. This can be a real concern when a state body has several subcommittees with overlapping members. I won't go further into that because I believe that you do not have subcommittee members or subcommittees with overlapping members. Is that right? The two advisory committees don't overlap with members. Is that
Correct?
That's correct. Okay, so I won't get further into that. I'll just make things more confusing. A serial meeting can include face-to-face communications, telephone calls, emails, texting, instant messaging, and all other forms of social media. Again, the philosophy behind Bagley-Keene is to promote public participation in the committee's deliberation process. When members of a state body engage in secret serial communications outside of a public meeting, the public is deprived of the opportunity to participate. The concept of serial meetings is a bit complicated when I just read it out loud to you. So at the end of this training, if you have specific questions about what constitutes a serial meeting, I'm happy to try to answer those. And as I mentioned before, if you ever have any doubt that communication that you're having with other members may be a serial meeting, I would advise you to reach out to your staff with the specific facts to make sure that you're not having a serial meeting and violating Bagley-Keene. Next slide, please. There is a very broad exception, which we call the pre-meeting staff briefings exception. The serial meeting prohibition does not preclude staff from briefing individual board members regarding an item on a noticed agenda. Agency staff may brief each individual board member, and each individual board member may contact agency staff individually to obtain information before a public meeting. Staff, however, may not communicate the comments of a member to any other member. So the key really here with the pre-meeting staff exception is that the contact between staff and the board members is on an individual basis. So you really want to just be careful that when you're reaching as a committee member, if you reach out to staff with a question about something that's on a noticed agenda, they don't include other committee members in your email, for example, or your phone call, that you ask staff members without including any other committee members. And we also encourage staff when they're reaching out to the committee to provide additional information or a response to a question about an agenda item, to only include one committee member at a time to try to prevent someone from accidentally replying all and violating Bagley-Keene requirements by deliberating with a majority of the committee. Next slide, please. What is not a meeting? There are some gatherings of a majority of a state board that are not subject to Bagley-Keene. For example, a conversation between a member of a state body and any other person, such as a member of the public or staff, is not subject to Bagley-Keene, unless, of course, it's part of a serial meeting. But if a member of the public is having a conversation with a committee member, or a member of the staff is having a conversation with a committee member, that's not going to be governed by Bagley-Keene, unless it's part of what we talked about earlier, a serial meeting where one person is being used to communicate the thoughts or opinions of committee members to other committee members. There are also some very limited exceptions for conferences, public meetings of other bodies, and social gatherings, as long as a majority of the members do not discuss committee business. These exceptions for conferences and other meetings are very fact specific. So if there is a conference or another public meeting that you plan on attending with any other committee members, we would really encourage for you to reach out to staff and make sure that more than one committee member attending a conference or another meeting is not going to be a violation of Bagley-Keene. And the other key thing about all of those exceptions is that those conferences or public meetings are not going to include a discussion of matters that are within the jurisdiction of this committee. Next slide, please. So this is one of the biggest or most important parts of Bagley-Keene, which is the notice requirements. Bagley-Keene requires meetings to be noticed 10 calendar days in advance, including posting the notice on the internet. The notice must include an agenda of matters to be discussed at the meeting, which includes a brief description of each agenda item. Generally, items may not be added to the agenda after the 10-day notice period. There are very limited exceptions to this. A board member may not discuss any item that's not on the agenda, even if no action is to be taken by the board. So merely discussing something that's not on the agenda can be a violation of Bagley-Keene, even if the committee doesn't end up making a decision. Next slide, please. The public has a right to attend meetings anonymously. This has become a little bit more of an issue with remote meetings because there are a lot of platforms that require for you to put in your email address or to put in a name when you want to attend as a member of the public. And so what you can do to make sure that the public is aware that they can attend anonymously is in your notices. Staff can let the public know that they don't have to put in their email address or they don't have to put in their name if they want to attend as a member of the public and make comment. They can put in anonymous or something that they're allowed to hide, or essentially not provide their name or anything, any of their contact information. The public also has a right to speak at public meetings with very few restrictions, and the public has a right to criticize this committee and really any state body. State bodies may adopt reasonable time limits. Whether a time limit is reasonable varies with the circumstances of each meeting. As a state body, you must avoid restricting the content of speech and should treat competing viewpoints fairly. The public does not have a right to comment on matters not under the committee's jurisdiction. So the public can show up, criticize the body, but it doesn't have a right to talk about matters that are completely unrelated to the business of this committee. Though members of the public may comment on items not on the agenda, committee members are prohibited from discussing any items not on the agenda. This sometimes means that committee members are prohibited by Bagley-Keene from answering questions or responding to criticism that's brought by a member of the public at a meeting. And that's one of the really frustrating parts of Bagley-Keene is that members of the public can bring things up, can bring criticism up or ask questions. And if the matter that they're asking about is not agendized, committee members are prohibited from addressing those questions or addressing the criticism brought by members of the public. What you're able to do in those situations, if there's something that's brought up by a member of the public and you really want to address the criticism or the questions, is that during the agendized item for future meetings, you can ask staff or request that that particular subject be agendized for the next meeting. And that way it can be addressed at the next meeting. Next slide, please. Members of the public also have a right to request meeting records. A meeting record is any writing distributed to a majority of this committee in connection to an agendized item. Such records include meeting notices, agendas, agenda packets, memos, reports, or any document prepared by or at the direction of staff or committee members. including support or opposition letters received from members of the public. Next slide, please. Bagley-Keene also requires that all votes and abstentions be public and recorded. The best practice is to use roll call and record every decision in the minutes of the meeting. Next slide. And that's the end of our Bagley-Keene presentation. Additional resources, I'm sure you can request from your staff, and you can also go to the Attorney General's website for additional information. There are a lot more parts to Bagley-Keene that I didn't cover here because that would probably require 2 or 3 hours, and I don't think that that's something that you would necessarily want to sit through. But if you have any questions, I really would encourage you to reach out to your staff first and foremost. And then also there is additional information available on the Attorney General's website, and the URL is in the slide right here. And with that, I can try to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Malad. Do any board members have any questions about Bagley-Keene at this time?
I have a quick question. Imagine a scenario where I meet with 4 members of this governing board, which is clearly not a majority. That's not a meeting and not subject to Bagley-Keene, right?
How many total members? I'm sorry, I don't remember off the
There are
top of my head.
16.
There's 16
Correct.
of this advisory committee.
You bet.
That's right. So generally I know, because that's not a majority, but we really encourage and we advise most of our clients to use a rule of 2, which is only to talk to maybe 1 other committee member about committee business, because the problem with that usually comes up with talking to 4 other members is the serial meeting prohibition, right? So if one of those, let's say each of those 4 members had talked to 3 other members about this subject, then you could have easily reached the majority of the committee, right? And so the more other committee members that you talk to about a subject, the more likely it is that they've talked to other people, and now you're having a serial meeting. And that specific situation is why the legislator codified the serial meeting prohibition, because it's something that happens quite often in the exact situation that you presented. But I guess to answer your question more directly, if those 4 members had not talked to any other members about the subject, and only the 5 of you talked to each other, then no, it would not constitute a meeting, and you'd be fine.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any other questions from board members? Or even from C2C staff? Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, Malad. We really appreciate you taking the time out to present to this group and to the group yesterday. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then if we can move to the next slide. Let's see the slide after that. There we go. Okay, so now I am going to talk about advisory board governance. So I know we talked a little bit about this during our first meeting, but we really want to emphasize the point about how your advisory board will be governed and how you'd like it to be governed. So next slide, please. So our governing board, the 21-person governing board, updates our governance manual annually. So the next round of edits are due between December and January, and then the governing board will approve amendments to the manual in February. So the advisory board governance is included in the governance manual, and the governance manual is linked on our C2C website, and sections about the advisory boards begin on page 27 if you're interested in looking at that. So this is really important to know because the governing board essentially will decide on how, like, what amendments are included in the governance manual, and those amendments could affect how your board operates. So next slide, please. So during the November 2nd governing board meeting, the governing board will create a second governance manual ad hoc committee to amend the manual. The C2C advisory boards can provide input on the manual through their own ad hoc committee. Of course, as you just heard, all of these ad hoc committee meetings are subject to Bagley-Keene, and we did talk about having an advisory board ad hoc committee during our initial advisory board meetings. So we're doing one last call for volunteers. If anyone would like to volunteer for the advisory board governance ad hoc committee, that committee will pretty much go through the sections of the governance manual that are relevant for the advisory board, decide on how you want to operationalize your advisory boards, and then we'll take those recommendations, present those to the governing board's ad hoc committee, who will then present the final recommendations to the governing board. I know that's a lot. Hopefully that was like clear as mud. So we wanted to just do another like last call for the advisory board ad hoc committee. If you are interested, please feel free to email me, call me. You can also, if you're like super excited about this, you can also express your interest during this meeting as well. But I did want to just make that very clear that we would love to have volunteers, because if we don't have any volunteers for the advisory board committee, then ultimately the governing board will decide how your advisory boards will be governed. So very, very important. If you guys completely trust the governing board, that's totally fine too. But if you'd like to be involved, please let me know, and we can develop that ad hoc committee. So are there any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody like just super excited and wants to just shout out that you volunteer right now? I'll take that too. So any questions?
Here, Sydney.
And that was Lisa?
Lisa. Yes, hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
I will as well. It's Jennifer Orlick.
Perfect.
I can volunteer as well. Davis Foe.
Davis, okay, thank you.
Hey Sydney, Vikash ready here. I'll toss my name into the.
Yay, you guys make me so happy. Perfect. Anyone else? Anyone feeling like some peer pressure? They're like, oh gosh, I might as well just volunteer too. I'll take that. Does anyone have any questions too about this process? I know it's a lot. It's a lot of committees, a lot of boards to wrap your head around too. Awesome. Okay, well, either that was super clear or I left you all way more confused than you started. So I'll take either one. And thank you so much to the 4 folks who volunteered. Really appreciate it. So I will be in contact with you offline about setting up that committee meeting. All of the committee meetings, I believe, will be held virtually. So don't worry about like traveling or anything like that. And they should only be maybe 2 meetings for the rest of the year for that committee. So it should not be a huge time commitment either. But of course, that may change depending on how your discussions go too. So, all right, well then I will open it up to public comment. If you could go to the next slide. So public comment, we'll open it up for public comment on this section about advisory board governance. If members of the public would like to submit public comment, please use the Q&A function on Zoom and send a message saying that you would like to provide comment. We'll go ahead and unmute you when it's your turn. You'll have 2 minutes to comment. And please just know, while we intend to promote transparency and be really engaged with our community, during board meetings, board members and C2C staff are not technically required to respond to public comment. So please just keep that in mind when you do submit your comments. So I'll give folks a moment to submit any comments via Q&A. And then you can also submit written public comments to the email address that's on the slide. It's info@c2c.ca.gov. So I'll just do an open call for public comment. So we'll just give folks a moment. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and move to the next agenda item. Next slide, please. So now we'll have Shannon Serrato, our Director of Engagement, talk about community guidelines and the toolkit. So Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sydney, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you on this call. Again, my name is Shannon Serrato. I'm the Director of Engagement here at Cradle-to-Career, and it's so nice to be with you all virtually today. As work at Cradle-to-Career picks up speed and the team learns how to work with not only each other, but with you all, it's important to take a beat to determine what is working and what can be improved. Next slide, please. To date, we've held 3 community conversations and a second round of advisory board meetings, and communication, transparency, and intentionality have been central to the foundation of the planning and building process. However, we want to make the most of the time that we have with you all. We've got a lot of smart people in this virtual room, and we want to formalize the ways that we engage with the community, developing a shared sense of understanding of how we solicit feedback and then effectively communicate what we've done with that input following our conversations. As we continue to employ a user-centered design process, we have a unique opportunity to build the C2C community that we all want going forward. So in our next community conversation, which is happening November 9th, and you all can attend, we will start the basis of the community agreements and guidelines that will direct how we interact with our various groups going forward. We want to set clear and shared expectations and boundaries as we engage with members of the public, and we'll be creating important resources that will drive conversations from now on. We will also be creating what we've been calling internally a C2C input toolkit that will standardize the process by which we solicit feedback, such as taking quick polls for immediate feedback, and then broadening the scope of the topic for open-ended response, and then synthesizing and communicating that input back to members of the public to show what we've done through, for example, our new C2C blogs and our subscriber newsletter. I also want to take the space to explicitly state again that this is an evolving process. And if there are things that you would like to have done or things that you thought we would be doing but haven't done yet, please just let us know. You have a couple of minutes now for quick thoughts as a group if you would want to share them with us. Or you can reach us in various ways. You can annotate your notes and onboard your new tool that you all are using today. You can send us an email or drop your thoughts in the chat. This is only our second meeting together and the first chance that we really have with you all to hear from you all. So this is an open invitation to A, engage today in a way that works for you, and B, let me or someone else here at Cradle-to-Career know if we can be doing things differently that might help strengthen the process. So with that, I'm going to take a pause to see if anybody has any thoughts, ideas, anything that you want to share today. Yes.
Just a
hand?
quick
Okay.
thought. I know, one of the focuses is to engage the public and community, and obviously we're all professionals in this industry. And the polling feature is one way. Has there been thoughts about holding parent focus groups and or student focus groups around this?
So we are going to be talking with members of the community, but that's a great question. We could be opening up the community meeting just around this. Like I said, the community conversation will be specifically on this. So this is going to be one of our main agenda items. But if it feels like that is just the foundation and we need to expand, we can absolutely make that a separate meeting that will be focused specifically on that. And I think a focus group would be a great idea, especially as we're trying to reach more members of the community. So thank you, Jason, for raising that. I think that's a great idea.
Shannon, I could add a little bit to that too. We have some formal processes, Jason, that include some of those activities, though not limited to those. One of them is the yearly student experience audit that the statute requires us to do. So that involves interviews with students and community members to learn about the barriers folks experience as they are planning for life after high school. And also within our user-centered design process that influences how we build our products and our messaging. Part of that is prototype testing, putting stuff in front of people, members of the community and folks who would be using our products to get their reaction and create a mechanism for how we take that reaction and use it to influence the way the product's developed. So those are regular parts of the process. But as Shannon said, always open to other ways too.
Absolutely. And the idea here around the guidelines and toolkit specifically is we want to standardize something that we can have on the site. So anytime somebody can come here and say, how does C2C really do business? This is clear. We've set clear expectations. And so absolutely we'll be holding those in person, well, virtual meetings. I don't know if they'll be in person with members of the public, students, all of those things, but just making it clear the ways that we solicit and also take that input. We want to make sure that folks feel heard and then actually know what's happened once they've talked to us. So just making very, very transparent processes is the goal as we start out with you all. Any other thoughts, questions? Great. So that was just a long-winded way of saying that we are looking forward to this journey with you all, and we will appreciate however you would like to work with us and we embark on this work together. So again, feel free to reach out to me, drop the notes in the chat, on board, all of those things. We're here, and we just appreciate your feedback. So with that, I'll turn it back to Sydney.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Can I have the next slide? So now I'm back to talk about advisory boards and feasibility studies. So next slide, please. So we want to make sure that we're covering our blind spots. So we would love input about the data system and its tools before and during the development process. So that's where you come in as advisory board members. The objective is to generate interesting and meaningful ideas for what the data tools and the system can be. So next slide, please. So how the data tools we would make the data tools. It would follow something along this process. So first it would start with sharing new ideas. So advisory board members like yourselves would share their ideas about what the data tools could be. So anything, it could be brainstorming just off the top of your head. If you're like sleep at night and you pop up with a thought, like, I really think the data tool should do this. We would love to hear those ideas. That's exactly what your role as advisory board members would be. Then next, you would share those ideas in a meeting or via email to C2C staff. And then we here at C2C will complete a feasibility study to assess the recommendations. So make sure that we understand the cost implications, we understand political implications, staffing, if the data providers could even do that work. So that's where we come in to really support building out your ideas. And then that's when we finalize the recommendations, and then we give that to the governing board to discuss the feasibility study results and then decide on the new features. So of course, this process has not yet been totally finalized. This is the foundation of how we're thinking to translate your ideas into work for the data system. We will have a governance consultant come in to help us really think about this process and understand what the roles would be for advisory board members and roles for C2C staff and our data providers. But we wanted to give you just kind of a teaser, a little trailer into what's coming for your roles as advisory board members. So next slide, please. So how would we research your ideas? So that's where the feasibility study comes in. So the recommendations will be paired with feasibility studies by the office regarding things like data availability, reliability, and validity, and then also looking at legal requirements, any costs to the office and to the data providers, potential approaches for collecting information, and any political or other implications that could jeopardize the neutrality of the office. So it's just a really big paragraph to say, we'll figure out how we can get it done and if we can get it done, and then take that to the governing board for them to essentially decide whether to adopt or not to adopt. So this portion of the work will be really, really important and key for your roles as advisory board members to really think about taking what you're hearing from your stakeholders, your community, what you're seeing from your own perspective, and then using that to come up with really good ideas that we can potentially incorporate in our final, in the system or the data tools as well. So with that being said, do I have any questions from board members? And while if you could go to the next slide, I'll try to do this kind of at the same time. While board members are asking questions, I'll also open it up for public comment. So as I mentioned, for public comment, please use the Q&A function to indicate that you would like to provide public comment on this portion of the agenda. We'll unmute you when it's your turn. You'll have 2 minutes to comment. So while board members, if you have any questions or comments about this, please, members of the public, feel free to indicate that you would like to provide comment. So I'll open it up for board members at this time if you have any questions or comments. Jennifer, I see your hand.
Curious about the potential time frame for feasibility studies. I understand some of the suggestions we might have would be more or less complex.
Yes, that's a really good question. And that's something that we can definitely take back to our governance consultant to help us decide on. And then also, I'm assuming it would probably depend on kind of the size of the idea, what all it would take to implement it as well. So we always have the option to take more or less time depending on the idea. And then we also are trying to schedule these advisory board meetings in conjunction with governing board meetings so that there's, just a quick way to get your idea from the advisory board meetings into the governing board. So to answer your question, more to come on that, but there's definitely room to decide on how long we would have for feasibility studies depending on the idea. And Tamika, I think I saw your hand next.
On the same lines of the feasibility study, have we identified who would actually be conducting the feasibility study? Would there need to be an RFP?
That's a really good question. We have not yet decided on that, but again, that's something, that's an idea that I can take back to the governance consultant to help us think about as well. So thank you for that. Marshall?
Hey, good morning to you all. It's good afternoon on our end on the East Coast, but I understand that the final product will most likely engage multiple agencies across the state. Therefore, my question is there an opportunity to engage the individuals or teams of people at the individual like agencies to ensure, whatever we propose is feasible for them to provide on whatever the frequency timeline it would be for them to provide data to C2C?
Of course, yes. So to answer your question, yes, C2C staff will definitely engage with the data providers individually to assess the feasibility of whatever the recommendation is. Is your question more about will board members have the opportunity to interface with data providers? Is that what you're asking?
I'm sure we wouldn't mind, but it's more so would they have an opportunity to sort of talk to each other to make sure that whatever we propose is feasible for them?
Absolutely. And one positive aspect about our governing board is that every data provider sits on our governing board. So they would have the opportunity as board members to share their perspective, and they would also have the opportunity just as data providers to share their perspective as well. So yes, they will be an integral part of the feasibility study process as well.
Thank you.
And Marianne, go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand.
I just want to keep things organized for you, Sydney. I just wanted to connect the dots on one piece as we have this conversation. So one of the last slides that Sydney showed that had that paragraph about what is a feasibility study, what are the kinds of things that our office would look at in that, that's a cut and paste from the current version of the governance manual. So for those of you who volunteered to think about that, that's the kind of process that can be more fleshed out as you think about how do you as an advisory board want to come to consensus on a particular recommendation that would then kickstart that feasibility study process. That could then mean that the recommendation comes with that feasibility context to the board. So these are exactly the kinds of process questions that that ad hoc committee can dive into, and wanted to just highlight that as an example of the kind of information that's in that governance manual to date that outlines some of these processes. And sometimes it's just one sentence and there's a lot that we still need to unpack there. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. And Liberty, I see your hand.
I'm curious about timelines of feasibility studies and just getting to a place where as a group, we can even talk about making recommendations. So is there any sense about when we will get to that point?
Are you asking getting to the point of having like a finalized process for feasibility studies?
Getting to the point where we decide what we think you all should do a feasibility study on, and then the timeline for the study itself.
That's a really good question. So right now, I can't necessarily give a time frame for that. I will say we should have our governance consultant on board next month. So I am trying to start that work very quickly to make sure that you all have support in building out these processes. So I don't necessarily have like a direct answer to your question at this time. But as far as the board starting to share recommendations, it would be probably early next year or maybe early spring for you all to start providing recommendations directly on the data system and the tools.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and turn it to public comment. We did receive one written public comment from Krista Kapuza. My apologies if I mispronounced your name. She asked, will the feasibility study be publicly available? Would be helpful to understand the considerations you all are thinking of. Thank you, Krista, for that comment. Again, that is something that we can take back and really think about as we start building out the process of completing feasibility studies. So we really appreciate that comment. And I don't see any other public comment, so I will go ahead and have us, well, I'll do one more last round from board members. Did any other questions or comments? No, okay. So we'll go ahead and move to the next agenda item, and that is on data definition. So we have Ryan Estrellado. He is our Director of Data Programs, and he's here to talk about all things data. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Sydney, and hi, everybody. Good morning / afternoon. Ryan Estrellado. I'm the Director of Data Programs, and I'll be leading the development of our data tools and the user-centered design process for them. I wanted to start by just talking about the big picture here and just sort of a moment I had as I was preparing for this, which is our data partners, we have 13 of them who are sharing data with us, have publicly available data, offer lots of value to the public through the tools that they've built. And one of the central sort of missions of Cradle-to-Career is to take the data that they've shared with us, join them together, and add more value to that conversation. And as I was reflecting on that, I was looking through the bios of everyone here and sort of reading through it. And my reaction was, whoa, what a great group of people to have in our conversation as we do that. And I felt really excited. I can't help but think that we're starting something special here together. I'm really excited about that. So that's just a little bit about how I'm feeling about this. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I'm excited about this. I hope that y'all are also. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to talk about data definitions. And then we're going to go one layer deeper than that and talk about the underlying teacher retention, the underlying data that will go into our teacher training and retention dashboard that we're building. And then similarly, the underlying employment data that we'll be using for future products too, as a way to show you what our process looks like for putting this data together, and also give an opportunity for you to react to that. I've got a couple of questions for you that I'd love your advice on, that'll be asking, about each of those parts of the P20W data set. I think it's useful to give some context here and why I think it makes sense to talk about data definitions. Sydney touched on this earlier, that the role of the advisory board is to advise and to give recommendations. And so Some of this is spelled out pretty specifically in the governance manual, and the 3 examples that come to mind. The first is recommendations on how to make the best dashboard data visualizations that we can for the public. Another example is what points go into the query builder tool, what data points go there, what would be useful to have available, and how should they be presented. And then the third is how do we develop and improve the data request process that we're building. So those 3 are specifically in the governance manual. And that's work that'll be starting soon, some of it this year, some of it over the next couple of years. But as a foundation for that conversation, I think it makes sense to talk about what the data set looks like and then what our process is like to ingest data from a number of different sources and then put it together in a way that is a trustworthy example to the community about information that we can share. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so just a little beginning, introduction to this, a little bit about the data, the P20W data set. It comes from 13 different data partners. So they all contribute a little bit, some of it overlaps, but there are 13 to sort of coordinate. So all of 13 of our partners signed a data agreement committing some data points that they're going to share with us. The P20W data set, which is sort of the name that we use to describe this data set, has over 147 data points, and that doesn't include the data points that are there because they get calculated based on the existing data points. So it's 147 plus to start. Some of those data points are going to come directly from a partner's data set. So they'll give us the data set and the data as it is, once defined, gets included in the data set. And then others, as I mentioned earlier, come from the calculation of data that already exists, sometimes across agencies. So I know that a group like this is going to want to dig into what all of that means and all of the data points. And so I want to make sure that you have a link to the publicly available data definitions on our website. I'm going to drop that link in there right now in the chat. Okay, that's available for everybody. And that's the version of the data definitions that we have right now. They're continually evolving as we learn more about what each data point means. And if in the future that group of data grows, then that will be updated as well. But that's what it is currently right now. In the data definitions, each one of the variables has a standard format, how the data point is used, so a description of how you might use a data point, the grade level years for student related data. So for example, is it data that tells us stories about preschoolers versus grade school students versus high school versus heading in after high school, going into employment related and higher education. And then which years the data comes from. So again, we're working with 13 different data providers, and each provider has their own way of collecting data and the way that it's stored and the way that it's structured. And so the number of years that we have available differs. And so it's important to get some clarity on per data point, how much of it that we get every time that we ingest a round of data. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the journey so far, what does it look like for us? I tried to sort of paint a picture here of what this process is like. I know that this group knows that when we bring in data and we match it, there are a number of different steps that sort of goes into it, but worthwhile to describe that here. The first major step is getting the definitions of the data and then making them publicly available. As you all know, CTC, one of the biggest values that we have is around transparency for a product that's built for the public like this. And so the link that I shared to the publicly available data definitions is one expression of that. But there is a lot of work that goes into understanding what those data definitions are and establishing some target that we want to hit as we bring the data in and we restructure it and normalize it so that it expresses what the data definition tells us it needs to express. So lots of progress there. There's a version of that, as I showed you earlier. The next is what we're in the middle of right now. So thinking of this as like phase 2. And that's clarifying complex data definitions, matching definitions to fields. So schema mapping, if you think of it that way. So another just way to phrase that is once we have a definition of what a data point should be in the P20W data set, then it's about having conversations with our data partners to draw from their expertise about their own data set so that we can understand how the data that they give us needs to be either restructured or normalized to match the definition that exists on the website. All right, so that's phase 2. Then there's that step in there also, which is how do we actually, once we go into the data set of a partner, how do we find the field that maps to the given definition? All right, so that's a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration. Every partner kind of does it a little bit different. And our goal is to make this as easy as possible for our partners so that we can begin to build something together that's exciting for the public. And then finally, third phase of data definitions as it relates to C2C is consolidating those definitions into a newly updated public source of data definitions. What we gave you in that link is kind of, we're thinking of that as version 1. As the data definitions become more complete, we are in the middle of thinking of all kinds of ways that we can make the data definitions available to the public that serves a number of different audiences, researchers who need to understand on a super deep technical level what the data definitions mean, to folks who are just trying to make decisions that are not necessarily about research, maybe more practical for their day-to-day lives, but still need to understand what a data point means, what it means when we say grade level or expected earnings or graduation rate, because as we all know, those definitions are not always straightforward. There's a fair bit of nuance there, and we want to be able to make sure that we do our part to communicate that nuance to the public in a way that is meaningful. Okay, I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to pause here for a moment because I see something in the chat here. It's from Heather, and Heather, I saw your hand raised earlier here, so I'm just going to read your question here. I have a question about some of these variables. It looks like there's a substantial amount of processing to get to a single variable. Will the underlying data be part of the data system too? For example, in addition to highest K-12 math class completed, will students' individual course taking history be in C2C? Okay, so I got a few questions in here. I think the best way for me to answer, so some of this to be determined, but one of the things that I could sort of respond to here is that the underlying, so the data that's brought into it is data that's part of the participation agreement. Okay, so like all the data points that each of our data providers said we're ready, to work together to sort of bring this in, and those data points are connected to research questions that that our conversations have suggested are going to be important to the public. So to the extent that a research question requires a data point, then that data point will sort of live within the data system. I think there are a bunch of data points that are in there that aren't yet mapped to a particular research question, but our data partners and sort of task forces have suggested also that, yeah, this is probably something that will eventually you're going to need. So there's a whole category of those things as well. Okay, let me get to the rest of this. For course level data, some of the course, so there's going to be some of the courses provided because there are a number of things that are still sort of unanswered for us. Yeah, so let me give you an example of this. Sort of look at me. That's here. Okay. So one of the questions that we one of the conversations that we have with data providers is we get their take on like, okay, how much of this data is ready, right? And much of that data is like, okay, this group of data right here is, we have a lot of confidence in it in the way that it's collected. we interpret it in a really sort of clear fashion. There's not a lot of uncertainty there. On the other hand, there are some data points where uncertainty sort of plays a bigger role, right? Whether that be to the way it's collected or the way it's reported, maybe it's self-reported data or something like that, or the way that the data is structured. There's a little bit more uncertainty, which leads to an interpretation of it that sometimes our data providers aren't 100% confident about, and course level data is one of those. Now, that's not all course. I don't think folks feel that way about all course level data, but some of it, the response that we got from some of our data providers is like, this may not be ready yet. Okay, so let me pause there because I've sort of talked a lot through that. Heather, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think it's something that we'll have to revisit as we're talking about specific research questions and specific projects, because the more the data has been processed to get to, like, some of these appear as indicators, right? Instead of, they don't have a lot of richness of information. So like took a math class in high school or took an AP class, right? And that's going to have really limited explanatory power depending on the research question. So I think that's something we'll have to continually come back to.
Noted. Thank you for bringing it up. Okay, I think I might have seen another one here. Let me scroll through the chat, saw a few come in. Okay, Jennifer asks, as data reporting requirements change, so for example, FAFSA reporting becomes required for K-12, would that have potential to be updated to or replace current definitions? Some of the data points have very outdated and limited availability, so like applied for financial aid for 2006, 2007 only. Yeah, so those are conversations that we expect to be having ongoing conversations with our data providers. Which data points end up getting added to the agreements is a result of research questions that our sort of community talks about and agrees are important. And by the way, including the advisory data and tools advisory board as a part of that. Like, it's totally easy to imagine the process of coming up with an idea for a research question and related feasibility study leading to the addition of data points, but there's a number of parts of that process that come into play there. So yeah, I think the answer to that question, Jennifer, is there is a scenario where that happens. I think it's probable. Let's see if there are any others. And then Alex, I see your hand up too. So Amber asks, in looking at some of these definitions, it occurs to me that limitations of the data that might exist are missing. For instance, parent ed level in K-12 is typically collected at first enrollment, which could be quite old. So thank you for that. Thanks for saying it, and noted. We'll capture this in the chat and include it in our bank of input. Okay, so that's Amber. All right. So I've talked about some of these, responded to some of these questions. I'm going to invite Kathy Booth, who's been supporting the process from the beginning, to weigh in also. Kathy, is there anything that I missed there?
Hi there. Yes, so there's some historical information that might be useful just to share. So going back to the first question about course level data. So there was a pretty substantial review of the types of course information that could be put into the data system. And there were concerns raised by a couple of different data providers that they felt like putting all of the course related data in could yield some problems. And so we had a pretty extensive discussion back and forth. And the statement from a number of the data providers was that we were going to be working on ways to make the data at the course level richer, particularly as we look at ways to include data that's going to be put into electronic transcripts. So there was a commitment made to go back and revisit when more expansive course-related data could be put into the system. So absolutely, some of the really rich course-taking pathway analyses would do better with a full set of course-related data, but that may be a little bit further down the road. That said, for every single one of the data points that are on that website that are listed as what is going to be available to the public, we had an extensive planning process where we had all of the data providers providing basic documentation about how that concept existed in their own data systems and what variables would be most appropriate, to a number of the points that people have raised in the chat about concerns that particular data points might be weaker than others or more likely to maybe not be kept as fresh as others, that there would be caveats that would be provided about those data points. And that in some cases, the decision was made that the information would not be left available in the query builder tool because there were enough concerns about the complexity of a data point that you would have to actually request it. So there was a lot of pre-work that was put in to begin to identify these issues about usable and reliable data, but it is something that will have to be revisited periodically because data systems are constantly evolving within each state agency. So one of the structures that was put in place is that there is a staff position that is funded at all of the data providers and then multiple positions at the California Department of Education because they provide most of the data, with the intention that there would be sort of that capacity built in so that Ryan or Dan don't have to know every single data point and every single data provider, but that there is an expert at each agency that'll be helping to flag when a data point is changing, when there's an opportunity to maybe bring something more into public view because it's stronger, or when there's a significant change in a definition. So I hope that's helpful to clarify the thinking that happened during the planning process.
Thank you, Kathy. Super helpful. Alex, I know you've had your hand up for a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to type this, or it might still need to be fleshed out. I was just thinking about the community college data in terms of the colleges send it to the state system, and most of it's term-based. So I was looking at like EdGoal, and we can, as we send our data, we're always updating, or even like 5 years ago, if something changed in our system, like on degrees, we're updating it. And so thinking about awards now, our own dashboards are always changing because the system has decided to not have time-stamped sort of reporting, but it gets updated as we go. And as, you know, a college or, you know, figures out something about their data system and realized, oh, we didn't report on these 50 degrees, it then gets updated in the state system. And so thinking about sort of that both term-based timing of some of the community college elements, but also how the data gets updated each year. So are you thinking about time stamping, or, you know, just for each year that we upload into our tools, is that going to be static, or are we going to update it? You know, and so if we say, oh, we've got 1,000 more degrees in the community college system now because of the way that we collect that data, are we going to go back into the dashboard and say, you know, 2020 now has 1,000 more degrees? So just thinking about some of the complexity that we've had as we build out state dashboards. Just want to make sure that you all are aware of, you know, some of the things we do. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. Super important. In fact, we were just having a conversation yesterday about being sensitive to the certain times in the year where folks are preparing data at our data partners. That's a little different for everybody. So, you know, it's not like it's sort of, you know, there's one time of the year which would be very difficult for everybody, you know, to prepare data for us. But that's something that we're thinking about because the routine that we establish with the data partners to move this data is super important. We want to make sure that like it fits into the day-to-day needs of, you know, what our providers are up against as they sort of they do the normal course of the work. So noted. And I may have some questions for you about, you know, about some advice on the best way to do that.
Yeah, always happy to dig into the details. And yeah, it's always, there's no good answers for all of this. So it's just understanding, you know, how each of us do it. So.
Yeah, noted. Okay. I want to make sure I acknowledge a couple more in here. Jason had a note about the label of the LGBT status term, recommending LGBTQIA+. Thank you for that, Jason. Noted. It's something for us to look at. And I saw Marshall had a question about is now the right time to talk about additional data points. I mean, this is a conversation. It's a recommendation. We're having conversations about recommendations. So I would say, Marshall, if you have some ideas, let's talk about them. Let's hear them.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing. And I will spend some time after, I'm sure many of us will spend some time going through each of the elements. So because I just saw that I'm able to I just did a quick scan. So I apologize if I missed it somewhere else. I see that the one debt variable is amount debt. I'm curious to know, were you able to pull, are we able to get just some other debt variables, such as like one that I'm always interested in is sort of percent of debt owed, which is typically written as repayment rate, but I don't think that's the most accurate definition for that variable. So just curious to know, like, are there options for other debt variables that may be helpful to include?
Kathy, can I kick that over to you? Do you have any insight about the debt variable and sort of where that conversation landed for us?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the challenges we have right now is that there are some federal regulations that make it very difficult for some of the state data providers to provide all the information that we'd like to have about financial aid. So we began the conversation about what the variables could be related to financial aid, but we're really looking for some guidance from the federal government about the allowable use of financial aid and debt-related data in public-facing tools. So I think that there's a number of places during the planning process where we got partway through a discussion and then said, we probably need to spend a little bit more time on this as we move further into the development of the data tools. But this is a really good example of where this advisory board could be very useful. So if you're describing the ways that you're in the field trying to help people understand the nature of debt and how that affects, wealth creation, how that affects whether students make the decision to go to college at all, as you're able to be really specific about the way you want to use the information, then the C2C team can work with the data providers to say, well, what does that mean for how we construct variables? And especially when you're looking at something that isn't as well fleshed out, like the financial aid dashboard, your input can help make sure that what C2C puts together is really useful.
Thanks so much, Kat.
Thanks for the question, Marshall. Okay. I see some other comments in here, but it looks like responses to other comments. So just saying again, probably worthwhile to say, our process is we save this chat and we go through it and add it to the bank of input that we study to surface themes. And so we will definitely be doing that. Thank you, everybody, for these questions and for your comments. Super, super helpful. Okay, so we just finished a journey so far in data definitions. If we can go to the next slide, please, Kathy, just some examples of data complexity here. So I'll just sort of give a toy example of the data, of some of the things that we have to resolve, and then give something that's more real life. So example here, right? Majors studied in college. So if data set from one college institution has Eva majoring in accounting, but they use a code like AAAA at their college, and then over in the other college, over here, college B, Martin also majors in accounting, but they identify accounting coursework as BBBB, then they can look like separate majors. But we, of course, want to work with the data so that eventually we don't under or over count that. We want to be able to see that Eva and Martin are both majoring in accounting, right? Very simple toy example there, but a real life example, of course, is something like nursing. So if you look at an institution that uses the taxonomy of program system to code nursing, there's this one code for nursing, and then within that 5 subcodes. And then on the other hand, if you've got an institution that is using the classification of instructional program, the SIP system, they've got one code for nursing that's got 23 codes for nursing nested in, and then another one that's got 3, right? So the object is then to be able to explain clearly, there's it's sort of what Alex said. There's no perfect solution here, right? And so what we want to do is find a reasonable solution, and then maybe most importantly, in the spirit of transparency, be able to explain to a wide audience what it is exactly that they're looking at. So finding the right grain size to be able to report that gives the audience trust in the accuracy of what we're showing them. And I think that one of the things that we can be talking about here in the future is what are the best ways to communicate that complexity? What are some of the ways that y'all do it in your own work or exemplars that you've seen? Because I think we're in the place where it makes more sense to just acknowledge some of this stuff is complicated. And we'd rather just be transparent about that so that folks can interpret it in a way that is both meaningful, but also has some underlying rigor. Okay, so that's some examples. And we'll go to the next slide, which is a chance for public comment. I'll kick it back over to Sydney to lead that.
Perfect, thank you. So now is the time for our public comment on this section of the agenda. So please feel free to message us using the Q&A function on Zoom to indicate your interest in submitting public comment. Just another reminder, you will have 2 minutes to comment. I do see a question in the Q&A from Patricia DeRoe. Are we allowed to know who the 13 providers are? Absolutely, they are on our governing board as well. So we can find a link to put in the chat to our website where you can see the list of our governing board. And then I'm also looking for another link on our website to give you more information about the 13 providers. So yes, we will definitely get that information to you. And I don't see any other public comments at this time, so I'll give it another moment just to do a quick last call for public comment. Oh, thank you, Marianne. So in the chat, I see the link to our legal agreements, and the data partners are also listed in those data agreements. Thank you. So I don't see any other requests to provide public comment. So with that being said, I'll open up to board members for one last round of any questions or comments that you'd like to share at this time. Go ahead, Alex.
Just one last, we're currently doing the K through 16 reporting, or well, grant applications, or at least I was involved in several of them. I imagine some of the partners are also at least high school. That might be another good case study of thinking about how this all can be used. I know there's a lot of frustration, at least on our part at the college, trying to come up with these elements that went across high school to 4 years in community colleges. So just an idea of something to look at as, you know, could be helpful. The system could help, and how those data definitions would be embedded within this, or, you know, where the linkages are. So sorry, I meant to mention that earlier.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, if you can go to the next slide, please. So now it's time for a stretch break. You can go adjust fluid levels, stretch it out, do some yoga, meditate, whatever you need to do. And so we'll take a quick 5-minute break. So it's 10:51. Please return back at 10:56. Thank you. All right, so can I have next slide, please? So it is back to Ryan Estriato, again, our Director of Data Programs, to talk about teacher training and retention data. Ryan, are you back? We'll give folks a moment to rejoin.
Sydney, while we're waiting for Ryan, maybe I can provide a little bit of context. but I'm trying to remember if we shared this at the last meeting or not. But we had 2 task forces over the summer that looked at these topics. So if it would be helpful, I can also drop those report outs that were shared at our August board meeting into the chat so that you have that for context as well. I see Ryan is back.
Hi, everybody. Oh,
Sorry about that, Ryan.
go ahead.
I start right at 10:56. No, sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, I hope everybody had a nice break, and I'm gonna go ahead and continue on here for us. So, okay, so teacher training and retention data. So we're gonna talk about two parts of the P20W data set. Just sort of give an overview of it and some of the conversations we've been having around both teacher training and also employment. And then I'm gonna have some questions for you, get your advice on each of these. And so first one up is teacher training and retention. Okay, so next slide, please, Kathy. Okay, so ultimately on these, we want to hear your ideas. So what I'm going to do is just sort of give some context by giving an example of what data is currently available through our partners. And then an example of questions that we can ask when we put the P20W data set together. So joining data across different partners, what that empowers us to ask in the way of questions, new questions. And then the fun part, ask you, if you had this P20W data set today, what are the questions that you would ask? And we'll be taking those in the notes to help inform the way we develop the tools. Ultimately, the process that's happening here is the more and more that we learn about the types of research questions that you would ask if you had this P20W data set, the more we can look ahead, and as we put these data sets together, make sure that we have the right things in place for you to be able to answer those questions. Okay, so first one. Okay, so here's what's currently available, right? So teacher employment data publicly available. Here's just an example. This one happens to come from our partners, California Department of Education, in a report that they made called Teacher Assignment Monitoring Outcomes. This is a partnership between the California Department of Education and the CTC. And one example of information that's shared on that report, lots of information, but one example is the share of teachers with each credential type and by subject area. Okay, so you have teacher workforce, what share of them have each type of credential type, and then in which subject areas. Now, P20W data set, once we put that together, builds on that. Now we're empowered to ask additional questions. Here are 2 examples. Does the racial and gender composition of teachers reflect that of California students? That's one. And then another is, are pre-service candidates training in areas where there are teacher shortages? So how well does the what we understand to be the teacher shortage areas match up to teachers training, the teacher training pipeline? Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just setting context here. When you share the data questions that you would want to work on, if you had the P20W data set, you help us build the data tools that help you answer those questions. So let's get your advice on this now. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the research questions you would ask if you had a P20W data set that combined data across a number of different institutions? I'm going to give 2 examples just for inspiration. Think big here, and you'll be answering these in the chat. So 2 examples. How do licensing pathways differ by some disaggregated teacher group? So maybe that's race comes to mind, but there are other ones. Another example might be, how do the subjects that teachers earn their credential in differ from the subjects they teach? Right, with those as signals as the types of questions that we can ask when the P20W data set is put together. Go off mute or enter in the chat. In your role, what are the questions that you would be asking?
Brian, can I ask a clarifying question?
Please.
I believe, if I recall correctly from the first slide, that the data set you mentioned also looks at misalignments of teachers who are teaching courses that they're not necessarily certified to teach.
Yes. What it looks at specifically is the area that they're teaching and then the credential type. Yeah. So then there's like, there has to be a layer of interpretation there of like sort of what that means. Yeah. Good question. Heather?
I would be interested in trying to get at issues of effectiveness. So looking at how long teachers stay, things like value-added scores, if it's appropriate given the grade and subject, just trying to understand variation by program as well, and seeing how programs interact with particular districts to try to then give that feedback to the system about improving the programs.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Let's go to Marshall, and then I also, for folks in the chat, I think I see some more things there too, so we'll go there. But Marshall, go ahead.
Yeah, I wrote in the chat, definitely would love to see disaggregation by race and gender for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I would assume, but I just want to make sure that early childhood professionals are added into this. If not, I would highly recommend adding early childhood professionals as well.
Noted. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, one more thing. And if
Please,
they are not required for early childhood specifically to have a post-secondary credential.
Childhood, right? I'll read some from the chat just so folks know about the conversation. Pulling retention in districts for the number of years. Okay, so that, Jason, that would be how long, once teachers start, how many years are they staying before leaving if they leave? Did I get that right?
I think that's a great data set to have. Yeah, I was thinking actually in a specific position or role at a district.
Got it.
Or school site.
Liberty says it'd be helpful to know which data on teachers and students are included in the participation agreement between C2C and data providers. Okay, noted. Yeah, got it. Okay, so Liberty, that's like teachers, like which credential types are included, or is it more like at the grain size, like LEA versus district or county or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's wanting to know what is actually possible. Kind of starting there, and knowing I don't know specifically. Some teacher data comes from C2C or CTC, not C2C, and some could potentially come from CDE, but I don't know what is agreed upon in the participation agreements. And in order to get at these questions, it's really important to know what is actually going to be provided and linked between teacher levels.
Thank you. So related to that, and also addressing some of the other questions, we, for the teacher retention dashboard and also the employment related data, I think I mentioned this earlier, we had convened a task force to be able to talk about what those data definitions are, what are some of the complexities that we have to sort through, who's included and who's not, the types of research questions that we could answer. And as a testament to how strong y'all's professional instincts are, a lot of those same questions came up at those task force meetings. And so I'm going to add, Marianne has offered to be able to drop some of those report outs from previous board meetings, just for your reference. It's a lot of material, don't have to read it now, obviously, but good for you to have to see if some of the questions that you got are answered there, or also use it to inspire more questions that we can talk about together as a group. So those are the, Marianne just dropped that link in the chat. Those are the report outs of the task force meetings, employment and teacher training and retention. Okay. Tamika, you had a question?
I did. I wanted to know if this information was going to be disaggregated by also charter schools, or if charter schools were going to be included in this data.
It's a really good question. I'm going into the data points right now to see if there's school type. Kathy, do you know off the top of your head if there's a school type variable for the LEAs?
I would have to go
think they
back
are.
and look. I recall that there were some questions that were raised about school type, but I don't remember clearly enough.
Okay.
I can answer that right now. There is school type and district type and charter status as part of the data elements.
Cool. Thank you, Dan. Dan Lamery, everybody, Director of Data Infrastructure. Okay. So Tamika, let's see. Lisa, I don't think we've gotten to yours yet, right? Oh, you're on mute.
Process question.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for sharing these materials. I agree that it would be really helpful to review these materials in order to be more useful to you to have a conversation. So my big process question is, this conversation we having right now, is this the conversation on the teacher dashboard, or is this meant to be like a little warm up for like a future official conversation where after we all have the opportunity to review materials, see all the data elements that are going to be available for this dashboard, to at that point have a conversation to make our official recommendation?
Yep. This is a warm up for sure.
Warm up. Thank you.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Sorry if I missed that earlier.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, so worthwhile. I'm glad that you asked that, because I could just sort of, I can give some, I can say more about sort of where we are in the process. Okay, so we are at the point where we are organizing the data, talking to our partners about how to get it to us, understanding the definitions, getting clarity on that. Other milestones in the process are going to be, once we sort of get through like transferring it securely, et cetera, then designing the proper visualizations that would reflect answers for the research questions that people are likely to want to ask. And we're going to need a lot of advice and recommendations from y'all even before then, but definitely at that point too, on what those visualizations would look like, how will they match up to the research questions that we feel are relevant. Yeah, so definitely more to come.
Okay, terrific. That's sort of confirmed. This isn't like that. This isn't it, right? This is not it.
No, this is not.
Okay, great.
This is not the canonical round of input for
Okay.
the teacher dashboard. No,
Okay, good to
ongoing
know.
conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Marshall, a question, or was your hand up from the last time?
Forgot to put my hand out. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Just want to make sure I didn't miss. Okay. Just gonna take a quick breeze through the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating at this level. It really helps us. And, sometimes, it'll take a little bit for us to sort through all the comments and, and draw the themes and stuff from it. Just know that we want to make sure we address all these questions and also integrate your input into the way that we develop these products. And so thank you so much for participating. Okay, so let me reorient myself here. Now, okay, so now I'm going to kick it back over to Sydney to get public comment, and then we'll talk about the employment data set.
Thank you. So now it is time for public comment. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to indicate your interest in providing public comment. You will have 2 minutes to provide comment. And then also, if you'd like to provide written comment, you can do so via Q&A, or you can also email us at info@c2c.ca.gov. So at this time, I do not see any requests for public comment, but I'll give folks a moment to submit their request. Okay, I see one comment. Justine Bone, have all districts that are participating digitized their information as a prerequisite for this initiative? So thank you so much for that comment. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if we can answer that now, but I'll open it up if anyone would like to provide an answer.
I could answer some of that, which is our conversations that result in the transfer of data are with, so relating to school districts is with the California Department of Education. So, so the discussions about their data points, so the variables in their data set are about the data that they receive and certify from school districts. So the conversation isn't directly with school districts, it's with the California Department of Education about the data points they have, which of course are from their certified from their school districts.
Thank you. I don't see any other requests for public comment, so we can go ahead and move to the next point of the agenda. And Ryan, I think that's you again.
Okay, so exact same things we did the last time, but instead of teacher training and retention data, we're going to do the round of recommendations on the employment data. Also, to Lisa's earlier point, not the canonical round of recommendations for employment data, just the start, just the warm up. These conversations, of course, will be ongoing. So just a reminder about that. Okay, so employment data, if we can go please to the next slide, Kathy, thank you. Okay, so again, our partners have employment related data publicly available. Super valuable, right? So for example, community college, CSUs and UCs have earnings by major. Community college students in career education programs who've secured a job in their field of study, high demand jobs and their associated earnings based on education level. That's publicly available data through the dashboards built by our partners. When we assemble the P20W data set, we'll be able to ask more questions, additional questions. So for example, these are just two examples, showing when students enter the workforce during their educational journey. And then another example, clarifying timeframes for attaining living wages and how that relates to educational attainment. So looking at it at intervals of time after they graduate. Next slide, please. All right, so once again, here's how you can help. When you share the data questions that you want to work on, you help us build the data tools that help you answer those questions. This is very important to us. If we understand the questions that y'all think are important, then we can build the data set so that they answer them. So let's get your recommendations now. Next slide, please. Okay, so in your role, if you had a P20W data set, what are the types of research questions you would be asking to inspire and signal the type of questions that are possible? Here are two examples. How much do, insert who's included, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, earn on average over what period of time after graduating, and how has this figure changed? Another example, how much do, who's included, earn on average 3, 5, and 10 years after graduating? Side note, Marianne's just put the report out from the task force that looked at the employment data. And so this insert who's included, the root of that sort of terminology is, even when you review that, you'll see that there was a lot of conversation about the folks who are identified in each of the related data sets and how different variables can affect who's counted, maybe accidentally double counted if we're not careful about it. So this is related to things like graduation status, whether or not folks left the state or employed outside the state. So a lot of that is decision making around who to count. And then again, as I said earlier, perhaps most importantly, how can we transparently communicate to the users of this data exactly what they're looking at? So with those two questions as inspiration, what are the questions, research questions that you would want to answer using the employment related data in the P20W data set? You can go off mute or you can put your questions in the chat. I'm going to give just a few moments for this so folks have some time to reflect. And then Jennifer and Davis, I see y'all. I'm going to call on you just a little bit here to take your questions. Okay, looks like people are still typing, so I'm going to let that go for a little bit. Jennifer, go ahead.
Sure. So I think with this one and also with the previous one, it's really important, I think, to have a geographic kind of comparison for this data, or to understand some of the regional issues there. So for example, we're in Santa Clara, and we know objectively, right, that Silicon Valley is a big driving force, but we have, each region may have its own areas of strengths in terms of programs that are available at the UC, CSU, and community college level. And then at the K-12 level or high school level, we're really trying to encourage our system to make those strategic decisions about which career technical education programs are going to be, best set up our students for success, and be the ability to be connected to those then higher ed systems that eventually lead to these, career pathways. So I think there's a lot of potential there. And so in my role, the decisions we would want to be able to make with this kind of data are what types of career technical education programs to be providing at each of our school sites, which student groups, maybe by demographics, would most benefit from having those opportunities earlier. And then in addition, there are, of course, the dual enrollment AP and IB courses that we're able to provide in a more strategic way. And having evidence aside from, these are the top 10 paying jobs or growth jobs in the area would be really helpful to help us make those decisions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Davis.
Yeah, I like to echo Jennifer's point as well, as we're kind of thinking about just getting access to the employment outcome data, whether it's earnings and jobs and field of study. I think a lot of information about the context to which those outcomes are achieved would be useful. So like Jennifer mentioned, getting information on the regional labor market context, the local economic conditions specific to that area. I think across different jobs, careers and occupations would be valuable, but also I think also putting adjacent to that considerations for different student characteristics and demographics, just to consider gender and race and kind of how different isms interact with labor market inequality and so on and so forth. I would also think it'd be kind of interesting to also get how the job search process looks like for different students, as well as the interaction between people's labor histories and experiences and skill development, and how that interacts with different career trajectories.
Thank you. Marshall?
Echoing advisory members Jennifer and Davis as well. I think this is another example of, if we can definitely, and I would love to be looped in whatever conversations about the financial aid data. I'm always interested in addition to the, racial demographic groups and demographic groups by gender, in terms of also income, to see to what extent are post-secondary credentials benefiting students from low income backgrounds too. That would just be super, super, super helpful.
Noted. Thank you, Marshall. Vikash.
Thanks. So I'm wondering if we'll have in the data the granularity to help us with, it's sort of in the pathways question, but thinking about students who earn their bachelor's degrees through transfer pathways versus those who enroll natively at a 4-year segment, and sort of disaggregating along those routes, I think would be a helpful tool. So that's just something that's on my mind when I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, transfer pathways is something we've been talking about too, possibly as the next dashboard to be developing. So may contact you with some questions about that.
Please do.
Mm-hmm. Tamika.
Perhaps being able to disaggregate the data based on the new student-centered funding formula, some of the targeted populations, parents are one, first generation, formerly incarcerated, veterans, to look at their employment outcomes.
That's a really great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, while folks are still reflecting, I'm going to go through the chat here and see lots of +1s, see the comments made so far. Jason asks, how does a student's degree align to their careers? What careers and salaries are common amongst non-high school college grads versus high school and college grads? Okay, got it. Amber asks, not sure if this is possible, but also interested in zip code or census tract. Student was in when first enrolled and their wage outcomes. Noted. All right, I'm going to make sure that I just want to make sure we +1. Marshall gives +1 on zip codes, census tracts. Marshall and Jennifer, hands still up from before or new questions?
Just took it down. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's all right.
Virtual contact.
Yeah. Jacob, go ahead.
I think so. Some of this is already available to us in some capacity. CSU, UC, and community college already do this for their graduates. It'd be great to see those who didn't graduate. I know there might not be an easy way to do that, and then I think I recall it might be difficult to even just get high school students who don't go to college at all connected to EDD data. But I would love to see something on students who touched higher education but didn't complete.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know that in the employment task force discussion, there were conversations about graduation status as a variable, how that would affect the data set. You might be interested in that conversation there in the report out. But if you want to, we can talk more about that. I'd love to hear sort of more detail and nuance there, because I know that that's a thing that's come up. Something that we have to resolve. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to take one last note here to make sure I got this. Okay. Okay, everybody. Certainly, this is not the end. If more questions come up for you, please email me. I'm going to, or email anybody on the team, but I'll put my email here in the chat. And I really want to thank everybody for sharing their insight here. I just think I'm really excited about this. And, yesterday we met with the Community Engagement Advisory Board, and I shared how I was feeling with them, and I want to share it here too. I really see this as, I would think of it as blind spot coverage, for our team as we design these products. I think I really get this feeling that, everybody here is, for the cause, nudging me in the right direction and us in the right direction to look in the places that are going to lead to us to develop the products that are going to be really meaningful for the public. And I'm so appreciative of that. So thank you so much for your time. And I'll kick it back over to Sydney for the public comment and then adjournment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So now is the time once again to submit public comment. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your request to provide public comment, and verbal comments will be limited to 2 minutes. So please go ahead and submit any requests for public comment. We'll give folks a moment. Okay, I don't see any requests for public comment, so we'll go ahead to the next item. And so now I will go ahead and turn it over to Marianne Bates, our Executive Director, to provide any closing remarks.
Thank you, Sydney. Just wanted to share appreciation to all of you here on this advisory board, to members of the public who were part of the conversation today. It's really exciting to be able to do this work with so much engagement from all of you. Two quick reflections from my end. Really appreciate the specificity of the feedback and ideas that you shared today. It's really helpful, and it gives us concrete things that we can dig into in more detail. The other piece that I noted throughout this conversation is that today's meeting helped provide us with some pointers on what kind of information you need from us in order to be able to make informed recommendations. So thank you for that. And if you have further ideas on that front, please let us know. And then finally, we started this meeting talking about some process things and talking about governance manuals and things like that. I think this is a real opportunity. You are the very first Data and Tools Advisory Board, and the kinds of processes we put in place and that you generate and create can kind of set a path for how this work will continue in the future. So I'm really excited and feel very honored to be able to do this work together with all of you, with such an engaged group who are here because you care about what we're trying to accomplish together in building this data system. So just a huge thank you, and looking forward to the next conversations we'll have.
Great. So just to close us out, I just want to give a couple of updates. So we will send out a survey to assess the 2023 meeting schedule. As I mentioned earlier today, we are trying to schedule advisory board meetings with enough time in between to get to a governing board meeting. So I will send out a survey to see what months work for you, which days of the week work for you, whether you'd like in person or virtual, and things like that. So please be on the lookout for that survey within the next couple of weeks. And then we'd also would love to have an advisory board member do a report out at our governing board meeting next week. We would only need your time for about 15 minutes to just give a report out about this meeting and our first meeting that we had last month to our governing board next Wednesday. I believe that meeting starts at 9:30. We're hoping to have the report outs started by 10 that day. So please be in contact with me if you're interested. If not, I might be reaching out to some of you folks to see if you're interested. So please reach out if you would like to do the report out. Otherwise, I think that's it. If you've received your onboard link, please make sure that you sign up and create an account in our onboard portal. Kudos to all of you who did that like right when I sent it out. I love that energy. Thank you. For those who did not get a chance to set up your account, if you need another invite link, I'll try to keep sending them once they expire so you have a fresh link to create your account. Otherwise, that is it from me. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for a wonderful second meeting. I think we're off to a really energetic and really good start. So thank you so much, everyone. And please let me know if you have questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.